So, how can a single ancient prophecy create two completely different futures? Today, we're going to unravel how one verse led to both an ancient Jewish festival and a modern American religious movement. It all comes down to a disagreement over 2,300 days. Okay, let's start with the riddle itself. It's this cryptic verse from the book of Daniel, and it's been puzzling people for centuries. Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleaned. Sounds straightforward enough, right? Well, not so fast. You see, that one little verse immediately brings up two huge questions. First, when does that 2,300-day countdown even begin? And second, what does it actually mean to cleanse the sanctuary? The answers people came up with were separated by 2,000 years of history. Now, for most of history, the answer seemed pretty cut and dry. It was all rooted in the dramatic events of the ancient world and, just taking the text at its word. The prophecy talks about this villain, this little horn. And for early interpreters, it was pretty obvious who that was. A historical ruler named Antiochus IV Epiphanes. This guy was a king who conquered Judea and was absolutely brutal to the Jewish people. And here's where it gets kinda spooky. His actions line up almost perfectly with the prophecy. He marched into the Jerusalem temple, stopped the daily sacrifices, put up an altar to Zeus, and just generally oppressed the people. He literally cast truth to the ground. So what happens if you take those 2,300 days literally? Well, you get a little over 6 years. And this isn't just some random number, you guys. It aligns perfectly with a super famous event in history. That 6-year window, it fits right into the time frame of the Maccabean Revolt. This is when Jewish rebels fought back hard against Antiochus, took back the Jerusalem temple, and, you guessed it, cleansed it. This rededication is actually an event that's still celebrated today as Hanukkah. So, get this, for almost 2,000 years, that was the story. Case closed, right? The prophecy was about Antiochus. But then, way later in the early 19th century, an American farmer looked at that exact same text and saw something totally different. Okay, let's dive into the second interpretation. This one treated the prophecy not as something that already happened, but as a roadmap to the future. Specifically, their future. So there's this farmer, William Miller, and he gets this idea that the key to unlocking the 2,300 days in Daniel chapter 8 is actually hiding in the very next chapter. He believed this verse was the missing piece, the starting pistol for the prophecy's clock. He came up with this really fascinating 4-step logic. First, he linked the two prophecies together. Then, he found what he was convinced was the correct start date. Next, and this is a big one, he used the day for a year principle, which turns one prophetic day into one literal year. So 2,300 days became 2,300 years. Then he just did the math. Okay, so why that specific start date? I mean, there were a few different decrees from Persian kings to choose from, but Miller argued that only the decree from Artaxerxes in 457 BC did the whole job. It didn't just rebuild the temple, it restored Jerusalem's ability to govern itself. For him, that was the true starting point. And this just shows you the absolutely massive scale of this new timeline. I mean, think about it. You start with a decree in ancient Persia. You add 2,300 years, and where do you land? Smack dab in the middle of 19th century America, the year 1844. And what about the cleansing? Well, for Miller and his followers, and there were thousands of them, this had nothing to do with a stone temple in Jerusalem. No way. For them, the sanctuary was the earth itself, and its cleansing would be a purification by fire at the second coming of Christ. All right, so let's jump forward to 1844. The clock is ticking down. What happens when this huge prophetic calculation finally gets put to the ultimate test? The date came, and then it went. And nothing happened. The world didn't end. You can only imagine the feeling. For thousands of believers, it was a massive crisis of faith, an event that became known forever as the Great Disappointment. But, and this is key, out of that huge disappointment, a new idea started to form. Believers thought, what if the date was right, but we just got the event wrong? The cleansing wasn't the end of the world, they reasoned, but the start of a judgment process in a sanctuary in heaven. And this became the foundation for the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And here's a really wild historical irony. At the exact same time the Millerites are looking up at the sky in October 1844, another American religious group, the Latter-day Saints, was looking down at the ground, holding a conference to raise money to build a very real, very earthly temple in Illinois. One group awaiting a heavenly event, the other building a physical one. So, what's the big takeaway here? You have two completely different destinies, all spinning out from the exact same verse of scripture. It's just a powerful lesson in how the way we read something can literally shape history. I mean, this table lays it all out so clearly. You've got these two paths that fork from that one single verse. On one hand, you get an ancient conflict and the Festival of Hanukkah, and on the other, a 19th century American religious movement that's still around today. It's incredible. Same words, totally different world. Ultimately, the story of the 2300 days is a powerful illustration of this idea. The person reading the text, their assumptions, their context, their world, is just as powerful as the text itself. It shows how the same exact words can go on to shape not just what people believe, but the actual course of history.